Actually, I think it saved my life because I had no idea where or what I was going to do. Absolutely. Okay then. Wow. Wow, that's awesome. It said on Wikipedia that you told Phil Anselmo you're not interested and won't talk to him again. This is not me. Which is all there is to say about it. Vinnie Paul, a name that will always be linked to heavy drums and the spirit of a wild, never-ending age of metal. He wasn't just Pantera's drummer. He was a symbol of strength, defiance, and unshakable devotion to music, even as the world fell apart around him. Vinnie didn't just keep time for the band. He had a strong way of playing the drums, a famous way of playing the double bass, and the spirit of live loud, die proud. Millions of fans all over the world kept their hearts beating. He won his spot as one of the best heavy metal drummers ever, sharing the stage with giants like Lars Ulrich and Dave Lombardo. Cowboys from Hell, Vulgar Display of Power, and Far Beyond Driven were important albums in Pantera's success, but they were also important in other ways. They showed how talented Vinnie really was and how he lived his life as live, real, play hard. But could the booze, the fame, and the roar of the stage drown out the pain he felt from his brother Dimebag Darrell's brutal death? He died quietly and by himself at the age of 54 from heart failure. He was always the life of the party. What gave that man his personality? And what was really lost when the last drum beat stopped? Let us look into Vinnie Paul's early life. He was the man who kept the beat for a whole generation. Even though he stood on stage like a metal giant driven by pure anger, Vinnie Paul was a Texas kid who grew up with music and discipline. He was an odd mix of Southern tradition and rebellious instinct. He was born in Abilene, Texas, on March 11, 1964, into a family with a long history in singing. He built the first home studio for his boys, where Vinnie and his younger brother Darrell Lance Abbott, later known as Dimebag Darrell, started their first jam sessions. Jerry Abbott was a country musician, sound engineer, and later a producer. Vinnie was first told to play brass instruments in that simple house full of strings and rhythms, but he was quickly drawn to the drums and the primal beat they created. Vinnie has always been a very busy child who loved loud sounds and fast beats and didn't like following the rules. Darrell was very interested in guitar skill, but Vinnie was more interested in famous rock drummers like Peter Criss, Kiss, Alex Van Halen, and Tommy Aldrich. They helped him develop a hard-hitting, high-energy style of playing. Vinnie had an amazing natural sense of timing and rhythm, even though he had never been taught anything. He learned everything by gut and feel. From the beginning, Vinnie and Darrell had a strong bond that could not be broken. They were artistic soulmates who knew each other's every beat and riff, so they were more than just brothers. As teenagers, they started playing in neighborhood bars, where it was dark, people were drinking, and there was music playing all night. In 1981, when they were only 17, Vinnie and Darrell officially started Pantera. At first, they played the famous glam metal style of the time. But Vinnie knew something wasn't right, even with the makeup and sparkly clothes. He longed for a sound that was heavier, more raw, and more violent. He quietly got ready for a change, a real revolt that would change the history of heavy metal with his brother. In Vinnie Paul's early years, there were no traumatic events or family problems. Instead, he grew up in a professional singing setting. He became a fighter because of his strong bond with his talented younger brother and his deep love of drumming. He was ready to fight on the battlefield of the chaotic and eternal years that lay ahead. Journey with Pantera. Pantera didn't always play in front of big crowds. It was made through blood, sweat, and many nights of hard work that were never seen. They started the band in 1981, when Vinnie Paul and his younger brother Dimebag Darrell were just two crazy dreaming Texas teens playing Van Halen songs in bars. They wore big hair and shiny leather pants and were chasing the glam metal dream. Pantera, like many other bands in those early years, followed the glam metal style and put out 4 independent albums. However, they were only known in the American South. At that point, Vinnie was already a very well-trained drummer, in charge of not only the beat, but also how the band works together. Vinnie was the practical brain. He was serious, level-headed, and unwavering, while Dimebag was the creative mind. Like two opposite ends of the same current, they were very different but could not live without each other. Their bond as brothers never changed, even if the songs they played hadn't gone viral yet. Everything started to change for Pantera in 1987, when they got a new lead singer named Philip Anselmo instead of Terrence Lee. New energy came in from Phil. It was rough, wild, and fierce. Vinnie found out right away. There was no longer glam metal to choose from. From then on, Pantera lost their shiny 1980s skin and became something heavier, grittier, and angrier. Pantera were the first band to play what would become known as groove metal. It all started with Cowboys from Hell in 1990. Every fill that Vinnie played on the drums was like a punch to the face. He locked in with razor-sharp riffs from his dime bags to make a sound that no one could miss. But that wasn't the end. That's when Pantera turned into a beast with Vulgar Display of Power, 1992. Vinnie was no longer just playing the drums. He was leading with them. Vinnie laid the foundations for Walk, This Love, and Mouth for War so solidly that they can't be broken. He was good enough without being fast. He slammed people with weight, space, and almost military-level accuracy. Grunge was on the rise at the same time that Pantera became metal's savage reaction, and Vinnie kept its heart beating. By the time Driven came out in 1994, Pantera weren't just fighting, they were taking over. The album opened at #1 on the Billboard 200, which is almost unheard of for a metal band that doesn't have any radio hits and doesn't compromise in any way. Behind the scenes, Vinnie kept running things, from sound and production to tour plans, and even managing Phil sometimes, who was falling more and more into addiction and hurting themselves. But Pantera's cracks got worse as they went up. As time went on, Phil Anselmo grew more distant and unstable, and he was often missing from recording sessions. Vinnie, who was always trying to be perfect, couldn't stand the lack of order. He saw his family being wronged, not just a bandmate running away. Vinnie tried to smile, but Phil couldn't. The excitement of performing gave way to heavy moods, grueling trips that lasted months, and members becoming more hostile toward each other. It was bad for Dimebag that his brother was fighting with the singer he used to work with. Pantera's last two albums would be The Great Southern Trendkill, 1996, and Reinventing the Steel, 2000. The music was still very loud, but the band was no longer working together. Phil got distracted and worked on other things. Pantera came to an end in 2003. Not even an apology or a handshake. Just rage and bitter silence. For Vinnie Paul, it wasn't just the end of a band. His whole world fell apart. Pantera wasn't just a job. It was what he and his brother did together and what they had built since they were kids playing music in their dad's basement. Because of the split, he lost more than just work. It took away some of his personality. Still, Vinnie didn't know the worst was yet to come. A terrible night that would leave a scar in his heart that would never heal. Vinnie was changed forever after that. Tragic events and new life. Vinnie Paul almost withdrew from the stage after Pantera broke up in a sour and silent way. He wouldn't talk about the band, stayed away from the press, and went back to his own world, where memories of a once hot metal kingdom were now nothing but ashes. However, his love for music never went away. In 2003, Vinnie and his brother Dimebag Darrell chose to start over. They would no longer be in Pantera, but they would be in a new band called Damageplan. They wanted to make something new when they made the album Newfound Power. It wasn't Pantera 2.0, but it was something they had full control over. When the brothers made Damageplan, they were able to express themselves without the long-standing arguments that had been going on between them. When they got back from tour, they had the same amount of energy as before, but this time there was caution, tiredness, and a slight feeling of nothingness. Vic knew that Damageplan would never be able to replace Pantera, no matter how hard they tried to smile. Nor could it fix the holes in their hearts that it had caused. Then, one night in December 2004, Vinnie Paul's whole world fell apart. Damageplan was playing at the Alrosa Villa nightclub in Columbus, Ohio, on December 8th. During the show, an armed man stormed the stage and shot and killed Dimebag Darrell right in front of Vinnie's eyes. Nate Gale, the shooter, was a delusional paranoid former Marine who thought Dimebag had taken his music. He came that night with a clear goal: to kill a man whom millions of people looked up to. A police officer rushed the stage and shot him dead, stopping him after he had fired 15 shots and killed 4 people. Vinnie stood nearby. He saw his brother, his singing soulmate and partner of more than 20 years, pass out on the stage where they had lived together. There are no words to describe how bad the pain is. It's never okay for a brother to see his sister get killed on stage. After such a horrible event, no artist can keep playing. Dimebag in a piece of Vinnie's soul died that night. After that, he was no longer Vinnie Paul of Pantera. After Dime died, Vinnie was never seen again. He turned down all requests to work together. Even stopped talking to people you used to be close to. He lived a quiet, alone life with only his girlfriend Chelsea, his family, and a lot of drink. Not to get wasted, but to stop thinking about things. Vinnie didn't play the drums with his brother again for almost 3 years. This time, he did it with strangers. Hellyeah asked Vinnie to join in 2006. Mudvayne and Nothing Face members came together to make this metal supergroup. Initially, he flatly refused. "I have nothing left to play," he said one time. But he finally agreed to give it a try, just once. Vinnie cried during the first jam session because it was the first time since that terrible night that he felt like he could breathe again. Someone had to take Dimebag's place. But with Hellyeah, he was back behind the drums, sweating and feeling the screams and bass in his chest. This is a feeling that only a performer can really understand. There wasn't a Pantera. It absolutely wasn't necessary. For Vinnie, it was a new beginning. In 2007, their first album came out, and Vinnie truly came back to the metal world, but this time not as an icon, but as a survivor. He traveled with Hellyeah, put out more albums, and tried to live a normal life in the years that followed, but people who knew him could tell. Vinnie never really got over the death of Dimebag. He always had a ring with his brother's ashes on it. One of the chairs next to his drum kit was always empty, where Dime used to sit. And inside him, there was always a void that no one could fill. He once said, "I wouldn't be alive." And so he stayed, playing, screaming, laughing, drinking, and living, battered but unbreakable. It was the only way Vinnie Paul knew how to survive hell. Personal life. On stage, Vinnie Paul was the embodiment of raw energy, long hair draped over a beaming face, a smile that never faded, and drum hits that felt like punches thrown into the air. Off stage, he was known as the soul of every party, a man with seemingly endless energy. Vinnie loved the noise, loved the booze, loved the laughter, and loved making sure everyone around him had a good time. In the metal world, he wasn't just Pantera's drummer. He was the ultimate host, the man behind the legendary all-night parties where beer, rock and roll, and brotherhood blended into something sacred. The symbol of that lifestyle was the cocktail he and Dimebag loved most, the Black Tooth Grin, a mix of Crown Royal and Coke, strong, dark, and sweet, just like the music they played. From backstage tour hangouts to living rooms in Texas, the Black Tooth Grin served as a toast to unbreakable brotherhood and a way for Vinnie to keep his brother's memory alive in every raised glass. But after Dimebag's death, the drink became a double-edged sword, fueling his laughter while concealing the silence no one was allowed to see. Despite being present at nearly every major party, Vinnie was intensely private about his personal life. He never married and had no children, not because he didn't want to, but because for him, music and Dimebag were relationships deep enough to leave no room for anything else. For many years, he was in a long-term relationship with Chelsea Yeager, a model nearly 2 decades his junior. She was more than just a girlfriend. She was a quiet companion who stood by him through countless shows, sharing both the spotlight and the silent moments backstage. Vinnie once said he didn't like being alone, but he didn't need a crowd either. What he truly needed was music, whiskey, and memory. 3 things that could either destroy you or save you. Those close to him recalled that even though he was the life of every party, when he returned to his room, he would often sit alone, quietly playing old Pantera tapes or setting out an empty chair next to his drum kit for Dimebag. For Vinnie, there was no such thing as getting over the pain. There was only learning to live with it. He once dreamed of writing a cookbook titled Drumming Up an Appetite with Vinnie Paul, where he would share his favorite recipes mixed with backstage stories full of laughter and liquor. That book was never completed. Like so many things in Vinnie's life, it remained an unfinished plan. A man who spent his life playing drums, but carried within him a void no one could ever fill. A man who could shake thousands of fans to their core, yet sat silently through long, lonely nights. That was Vinnie Paul. A man who lived for music as if there were no tomorrow, and loved his late brother as if he were still right there beside him, guitar in hand, ready to tear the world apart one more time. Final years. Though he had entered his 50s and carried a scar that would never heal from Dimebag's death, Vinnie Paul never once stepped away from the stage. For him, music wasn't just a career. It was an escape, the only way he could survive everything he had lost. With Hellyeah, he continued releasing albums, touring, and living out the same play-hard spirit he had in the Pantera days, as if the years of tragedy had never happened. And yet, even as the lights still blazed and the drums still thundered, people began to notice something. Vinnie had changed. He still smiled, still partied, still roared every time he took the stage, but his eyes, once lit with boundless life, now held a quiet melancholy. Behind the familiar swagger was a man who had grown increasingly withdrawn, a survivor more than a warrior. Even in the middle of the crowd, Vinnie kept a subtle distance, a hollow space that only Dimebag had ever been able to fill. He rarely spoke of the past. Whenever asked about Pantera or Dimebag, Vinnie would deflect, offering short replies or a faint, strained smile. But no one blamed him. Everyone understood. Some pains can only be endured in silence because to speak of them would be to shatter. At an age when many musicians chose to rest, Vinnie kept living as if racing against time. One concert after another, endless studio sessions, parties without pause. It was as if his life beat to a drum rhythm that wouldn't allow him to stop. But his body could no longer keep pace with the heart of an immortal rocker. Age and unbalanced lifestyle, and years of emotional and physical were finally began to take their toll. On June 22, 2018, Vinnie Paul was found dead in his sleep at his Las Vegas home. The cause was determined to be dilated cardiomyopathy, a heart condition that weakens the heart's ability to pump blood, combined with severe coronary artery disease. He passed away at the age of 54 without any final words, no stage lights, no drum solo, just a quiet night. It was a departure that contrasted starkly with the way he lived, but perhaps it was the only way he could finally rest after decades of living each day like it might be his last. Vinnie was laid to rest beside Dimebag Darrell at Moore Memorial Gardens Cemetery in Arlington, Texas. Two caskets, side by side, etched with the names of the two brothers. Warriors who had together written the most glorious chapter of groove metal, now reunited in the same earth, as if they had never been apart. There was no grand ceremony, no public funeral, but the global metal community fell silent in mourning. Artists from Metallica, Anthrax, Slipknot, Lamb of God, and more shared tributes. Thousands of fans brought candles, Pantera shirts, drumsticks, and black-toothed grin tattoos to the cemetery to say their goodbyes. In a rock and roll world where legends often come and go amid scandal and noise, Vinnie Paul chose a different path, quiet, steadfast, and fiercely loyal, to music, to his late brother, and to the values he never betrayed. His final years were not a closing chapter, but a last affirmation that no matter what fell apart, would keep drumming until his heart could no longer follow the beat. Legacy and impact. Vinnie Paul was not the fastest drummer, nor the most complex, and he never sought to show off his technique just to prove a point. But with every strike, whether the machine gun blast of becoming or the slow crushing pound of walk, he created his own language, a language of weight, precision, and the rawest instincts of heavy metal. Together with Dimebag Darrell, Vinnie didn't just give Pantera its soul, he helped give birth to an entirely new genre, groove metal. At a time when thrash was fading, grunge dominated the airwaves, and many metal bands were compromising just to survive, Pantera, driven by Vinnie's hammering drums, stood tall, refused to bend, and pulled metal back to its primal brutality. Vinnie's influence wasn't just in the music he played, but in the way he lived and kept the fire burning for the metal community. He was the kind of artist who never acted like a star, always ready to hug a fan, raise a drink with anyone after a show, and share backstage stories like an old friend. That authenticity made him a legend who didn't need to be idolized, just remembered. Many drummers of the next generation openly acknowledged his impact. Chris Adler, Lamb of God, Joey Jordison, Slipknot, Jason Bittner, Shadows Fall, all named Vinnie as a role model, not just for his playing, but for his mastery of space, his ability to maintain groove in a genre that can easily descend into chaos. Vinnie wasn't just a drummer. He was the emotional conductor of the entire song, the lifeline that kept the band from falling apart. His legacy was also clear in how he stayed true to himself and his philosophy until the very end. He never chased trends, never forced himself to change to please the market, never cashed in on a Pantera reunion. Vinnie understood the real value of being an artist, and he never sold it short. That's why even though Hellyeah never reached the heights of Pantera, the community respected him deeply because he never stopped fighting. Today, the name Vinnie Paul isn't just listed among the greatest metal drummers, it's etched into a golden era. A time when heavy metal didn't need gimmicks, stages didn't need laser lights, and artists didn't need scandals to be seen. He was the primal beat, the foundation, the pulse beneath the skin of every true metal believer. At the cemetery in Arlington, Texas, beside Dimebag Darrell's grave, there is a headstone engraved with the words, "Don't ever think it's not worth it. Fight until you can't." That line isn't just a life philosophy. It's the entire life of Vinnie Paul, the man who kept time for an entire generation, not with words, but with drumbeats born from a heart full of blood, full of fire, and that never once knew surrender. Vinnie Paul didn't fade away like a dying star. He went out like one final drumbeat echoing through the darkness, loud enough to awaken, deep enough to haunt, and real enough to never be forgotten. He didn't need radio hits, million-dollar studios, or spotlights shining on his name. All he ever needed was his drum kit, a brother with a guitar by his side, and a crowd of screaming fans, and that was enough for a life worth living. From piecing together riffs in his father's garage to topping the Billboard charts with Pantera and finally shattering into blood and tears in Columbus, Vinnie Paul walked a path no one else could ever replicate. He was the embodiment of loyalty to music, to Dimebag, and to his own true self, even if it cost him his youth, his family, and ultimately his life. What do you think of the life of Vinnie Paul, a journey filled with pain, fire, and unbreakable spirit? To you, what is the greatest legacy he left behind? Was it the relentless drum beats, the brotherhood that defied death, or the live, loud spirit that never once broke? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe to keep joining us on the journey through the immortal legends of rock and metal.